Good.
Are you trying to out-cough me, Your Worship?
I just wanted to protect the gavel. So we have now reconvened our meeting. The first item is number 5, which is public hearing. I'm going to start with my opening statement. This public hearing is convened pursuant to Section 464 and 465 of the Local Government Act. The purpose of this hearing is to allow the public to make representations to council respecting matters contained in City of Powell River Sustainable Official Community Plan Bylaw 2370-2014, Amendment Bylaw 2562-2024, and the City of Powell River Zoning Bylaw 2100-2006, Amended Bylaw 2563-2024. All persons who believe that their interest in property is affected by these proposed bylaws shall be given an opportunity to be heard respecting the bylaws. If you are joining the meeting remotely, you can participate by calling 1-833-782-7295 and entering code 165-261-797, followed by the pound sign. Please note that there's approximately a 30-second delay between the public hearing and the webcast. I will ensure there's ample time for callers to participate considering the delay. If you are calling in, please be sure to turn the sound off on your device to avoid any feedback noise. This is particularly important for you that are watching the hockey game tonight. No one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views known. However, it is important that you restrict your comments to the matter of the bylaws. There will be no debate during this hearing. Council's role is to listen to the public's view on the bylaws. Staff are present to provide clarification if needed. The intent of proposed bylaw 2562-2024 is to amend the City of Powell River Sustainable Official Community Plan bylaw by changing existing modular home park, and modular dwelling references to instead refer to mobile home and mobile home parks. The intent of proposed bylaw 2563-2024 is to amend City of Powell River zoning bylaw 2100-2006 by updating definitions for dwelling, manufactured home, and mobile park. The proposal also includes introducing definitions for mobile home and modular home, and permitting the use of a modular home as a principal or detached accessory dwelling whenever a dwelling is permitted. Additionally, it would prohibit the use of a mobile home as a dwelling except where permitted by zoning. I'll ask the corporate officer to please report on any written submissions received.
None, Your Worship.
Is there anyone viewing remotely who wishes to express their views respecting proposed bylaws 2562 and 2563? If so, please call in now. When speaking, please state your full name, residential address, which will be written into the record. Each speaker has 5 minutes to express their view. Do we have anybody online? For the second time, is there anyone viewing remotely who wishes to express their views on proposed bylaw 2562 or 2563? For the third and final time, is there anyone viewing remotely who wishes to express their views on proposed bylaw 2562 or 2563? Is there anyone present who would like to speak? Protocol requires to wait 1 minute. Do we have anybody online? Hearing there's no one online and no one in the audience, no further delegations or any other communications or representations regarding proposed bylaws 2562 and 2563 will be accepted. This public hearing is adjourned. I'll move to 5.2, which is proposed bylaw 2563, 2024, a zoning amendment, City of Powell River zoning bylaw 2100, 2006, and amended bylaw 2563 from 2024.
I believe you've done that, Mr. Mayor.
Excuse me, Your Worship. We combined the two bylaws together because they're about the same thing. So when you asked for public input, you are asking for public input on both the OCP and the rezoning bylaw. So both 5.1 and 5.2 have been concluded. And I think the next item, and the public hearing's closed. And I think the next item on your agenda, Your Worship, is item 6.1, adoption of the minutes.
Thank you very much. I will now move to the adoption of the minutes. So minutes of the regular council meeting held February the 6th, 2025.
Your Worship, I don't know if anyone has announcements, but 6 was announcements, which we normally do at the beginning of a meeting. And so we seem to have missed them.
How about if we recycle back as soon as we adopt the minutes?
Sure.
But,
I will move the minutes of February 6th.
seconded by Councillor Elliott. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passed unanimously. We'll now go to announcements. We'll start with Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to remind everybody about the upcoming performance of the Festival of Fine Arts on Saturday night. It's usually a really good thing to see.
Please note. Councillor Isaacson.
I'm going to save my voice for when I need it. Thank you.
Good decision. Councillor Southcott.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just remind everybody about the Banff Mountain Film Festival coming up tomorrow night and Saturday night. An annual amazing event, not to be missed.
Councillor Almeida.
Thank you. I will cover the rest. In addition to the film festival, the Banff Mountain Film Festival tomorrow, the Laszlo Tomazic Dance also has their big performance happening tomorrow and Saturday at the Evergreen as well. Tickets might still be available only at the door. Get there early. It will be packed. Also Saturday night, the complex will be really packed as the Regals have their final game of their playoffs happening. With Nanaimo coming to town, that's an earlier start. The game starts at 5 p.m. So you, in theory, could do both the Regals and the dance show if you really wanted to do both. And starting next week, I mentioned this at the last council meeting, the Sunshine Coast Tourism is putting on a flavor festival, and there are about a dozen businesses in Powell River who are partaking. You can go to flavorfestival.ca and look at all the restaurants and other establishments that are participating. There's plenty of them down on the lower coast as well if you want to make a small tour. The official festival dates are February 28th to March 9th. And there are certain restaurants that have a price fix menu or a special deal for the Flavor Festival. Great opportunity to try some places that you might not have tried before, both on the upper and lower coast. And a couple things for next week, as Councillor Elliott mentioned, the Festival of the Performing Arts, the things which she was trying to get out, actually starts February 28th and goes till March 8th. So
next Saturday.
Yeah, so there's actually a grand concert, or their grand concert is March 8th, but there's an opening concert with a combination of a band visiting from Vancouver, along with the Cadet Symphony Orchestra and another group that are doing a concert by donation on Friday, the 28th next week at the Evergreen. So that should be a great show. And the Kings are also playing that night as well. So a busy night at the complex. So no short of activities to see and do in the next week or so in town.
Thank you, Councillor. Definitely no boredom in Powell River on the weekend. All right. We'll now move to item 10, which is committee reports. And Councillor Southcott, were you chairing the Committee of the Whole on February the 4th?
It was
wasn't.
It was me, Your Worship, but if I'm hoping that if the public is interested, they could read the minutes attached to the agenda, or if I could have another councillor read them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to the Harbor User Advisory Committee meeting held December the 4th. And do we have any comments, Councillor Elliott?
Just that Councillor Palm is on vacation at this point in time, and he's the chair of this meeting. But he would point out that his hardworking committee has their minutes here and attached, and if people should read them and have comment, that he would be glad to hear them when he returns.
Thank you very much. Move to item 12, which was reports for decision. And 12.1 is the Cathet Regional Extreme Heat Response Plan.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. Always a pleasure to be here. I'm Ryan Toms, the Manager of Emergency Services with the Cathet Regional District. And just as a little background for those who haven't seen me report here before, the Cothet Regional District does operate a regional emergency preparedness service for all of the electoral areas and the one member municipality, the city of Powell River, within the regional district. And it's been a great ongoing collaboration in emergency planning going back 13 years now. And so the Regional Extreme Heat Response Plan is another collaborative effort that the Regional Emergency Preparedness Service, in collaboration, not just as we always do with the city and the regional district, but also as we tend to always try to do, is the collaboration with the Tla'amin Nation. And as such, this report that you see appended to my staff report here has already traveled through the Regional Emergency Executive Committee, also through the QRD's board a couple of weeks ago, and I believe my colleague, the Emergency Coordinator with Tla'amin Nation, is also delivering it to their Executive Council. You know, as a background to extreme heat, of course, all of us will recall the 2021 heat dome, and that's certainly the backdrop to our interest and the province of BC, who helped to fund the majority of this project, is the interest in trying to understand what's, to be perfectly honest, a relatively new hazard that a lot of us are trying to come to terms with, not something traditionally we thought of in our part of the world. And this year to year and a half project was largely an attempt to assess that hazard and the risks associated with it. I should also mention in that regard that not just a collaboration among the city of Powell River and the QRD and the Tla'amin Nation, but getting on board here was also really important for us to get the health authorities on board. And when we look across the QRD, there's actually not just Vancouver Coastal Health, but also First Nations Health Authority and the farthest southern island of the regional district also falls within Island Health. So having three health authorities on board also from the get-go was important because, of course, there's many impacts that happen in extreme summer temperature events, but the principal concern for us, of course, was the impacts on public health and trying to assess that risk here. And, you know, you've probably heard some of these stats before because they've been reasonably well publicized, but the 2021 heat dome is considered to have attributed to at least 600 deaths in British Columbia during that week-long event. Many of those people, the coroner identified as having underlying chronic health issues. 60% had even visited a medical professional of some kind in the month prior to their passing. And 98% of those fatalities happened indoors. And there's other stats, but I think those are some of the salient ones that we approached this to try to understand here. And the other underlying for us was engaging not just with the health authorities and our local and First Nation governments, but all the agencies that we could try to uncover, as well as the public, so that the emphasis on this was, you know, not encouraging, as sometimes happens in emergency planning, the temptation to step out of our jurisdictional bounds that want to do more and want to help. But the emphasis in this study, as you read through it, is really trying to encourage us to work within our jurisdictional boundaries and trying to identify for ourselves as local governments, the First Nation government, for our health authority colleagues and other important members and agencies in the community where their responsibilities and opportunities lie. And that's a real strong underpinning throughout this. And so when you look through the recommendations that you see, and there's 28 recommendations here, as there often are in these kinds of studies and plans. And for us, there's some for all of the collaborating parties. And so for the city of Powell River, you'll see some that are relevant to the city and others that aren't, and they're not intended to be. They're also all intended to be things that can be considered. This is really our first go at understanding extreme temperature events, extreme heat events. And a lot of this is stuff that we probably need to keep further exploring. But for us, we're hoping to give us the direction here for the coming years through these recommendations, and hopefully direction from this council, along with the board and the nation, for us to keep collaborating on considering these recommendations. One thing I do want to emphasize, because it's inevitably one of the questions, and if you've read through the report, one of the surprises might be that the topic of cooling centers is not the biggest topic. And early on in the study, as we worked with the consultant helping to guide us and reached out to many communities around British Columbia, one of the surprising findings was that many communities open cooling centers and uptake tends to vary. But most commonly, uptake is poor. And during the heat dome, unfortunately, a lot of people who did suffer the most and who passed were either unable or unwilling to go to cooling centers. And that was a really important learning that we wanted to make sure we passed on through here. Not that they're not probably a part of the puzzle, but that it's a very quick reaction, I think, to want to establish. And so there is a consideration, and I think it's actually probably the last recommendation in there of the 28. But I did want to highlight that. But even for us as local governments, typically, of course, a lot of our facilities, even right now, don't even have cooling. It's just not something that we've traditionally looked at. Whereas we all have heating, of course, given the climate we live in. As you look throughout it, just a few other emphases, certainly an emphasis on mitigation where you will, and especially here in the most urban part of our region, a lot of emphasis around encouraging the use of shade trees and other types of mitigating measures. Obviously, extreme summer heat really picks on urban centers probably more than anywhere else, and that's where we know a lot of the injuries and fatalities were really suffered, especially in the Lower Mainland. For us, the big highlight also, and I think leveraging a lot of the great things that we did throughout COVID, is regionally collaboration on communications. And I think you'll see that throughout here in the recommendations that our three governments, the nation and the local governments, tend to do a good job collaborating on communications. And throughout this kind of event and ahead of this kind of event is something that we want to keep encouraging. And also then making sure, of course, first and foremost is the emphasis on our own staff. And coming into this project, that was something that we wanted to make sure that we all recognize that first and foremost, we all have a responsibility to our staff, our firefighters, others who may be out working in these kinds of extreme temperatures, and not just assume that they're going to make it and be okay. So there's some great guidance in here. I hope that each of us will take away for our respective staffs. So in conclusion, really, I'd love to hear some questions if you have any, but this is a new topic for us. And I think this was a good exploration for us to bring something forward. I think our assumption is, as the impacts of climate change probably bear down on us in future years, there'll probably be another one of these into the future as we gain more experiences and probably more insight into how. But for the time being, we've brought these recommendations for your consideration, and hope you'll give us that direction.
Thank you. Councillor Doed.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this here. I remember hearing about the legislation from the province saying they wanted everybody to have the heat response plan, and thinking about how do you deal with that? And I'm reading the report, and I think you've dealt with it very well. There's no demands that you open a cooling center with a whole bunch of particular requirements in it. It's all consider doing this and that. 28 things to consider, 28 recommendations. And I think that will give city staff and everybody in the regions a good plan to go by. If we find ourselves in July and we're getting to what looks like a heat dome, all we need to do is get this report out and take a look at it and bring up the things to consider. And I was thinking the same as what you're telling us about statistics. I think probably the most difficulty people are having in reacting is going to be for people that have limited mobility or limited ability to get in and out of their home and to different places, because they are probably going to be the latest ones to realize they have a problem with heat and try to get somewhere to get it. to get help. And, I think that's going to be an issue. How do you deal with it? And how do we deal with it at my place? Well, my house has got air conditioning, but my mother-in-law lives right next door, doesn't have it. So a couple of times last year, we went over in the morning and suggested, why don't you come over and spend the day at our house? And that's a heat dome plan. It doesn't have to be real complicated. You don't have to have somebody pay for it or have a particular building. But I just want to say thank you. I read through all the recommendations. I think it's a really well thought out plan. And I hope that it doesn't just sit there. I hope people that find out about this meeting, maybe Mr. Galinsky will tell them about it. We'll find this on our website and read it and think about it, because summer's not that far away.
Councillor Early.
Thank you, Your Worship. So my question is around implementing the plan. So there's a lot of recommendations about having contact lists for when you need them, and making a plan for the fire department, making a plan for this, and they're all things you would do ahead of time. And is there coordination or support or for implementing these when they impact the city from your department, or is this something that the city should expect is on their plate on their own, as far as many of these integrated communication plans?
Yeah, through the chair, that's a really good question. And I think if you look at the recommendations, they sort of break into different categories. And certainly I think the ones that you separated those planning and mitigation ones that would happen well in advance, and then the more operational, in the week of. And right now we're in this bring it home delivery phase. Make sure we get the endorsements from council, from the board, from the nation, and then we get into that next phase, which some of these are very much in advance, and some of these are looking at guidelines for our fire departments, et cetera. We want to make sure we get those out the door here once we have direction to do so. Mm-hmm. Some of the communications plans are already in draft form and ready to work. So we really, throughout this, I get to be the face of this, but really there's all of your staff where relevant, whether it was fire or your planning services, et cetera. We really needed to leverage those to make sure that these things were workable for all of our respective departments, right? So we share this out now once we get the direction. And if it's a planning piece, then yeah, I think we're going to make sure that the right parties get to it. You'll see a lot in there for the health authorities too, which, with all due respect, we know they have a lot on their plate, but we want to make sure we share this with them now that the final product is here, so that they can also, given the really crucial job that they have for the most vulnerable in the community, to kind of help get ahead of that and also communicate back to us, because that was a big part for us, was to try to understand what gaps they may have, because there is a role for local government. We may not be the health experts, but we may have, maybe now or maybe in the future, the facilities that could help or something along that line. And yet we're not quite there yet. And that's, like I said, this is still a new topic to us. Mm-hmm. So some of these things we do need some time to roll out and flesh out.
So I think they're all really great recommendations and a good idea to endorse them. My concern is, if I endorse them now, am I creating a staff workload on the city staff that they're not quite prepared for, I guess? Or is this something you would come to the city staff and coordinate what is needed from them? Is the program kind of oversight around implementation still with you, or is it a handoff that you're looking for?
Through the chair, that's again a great question. And you will see, as I think Councillor Dowd pointed out, that the recommendations are almost all couched in a should and a should consider. We know there's a work plan. We all have work plans. We all have priorities and budgets, and we all think we're number one. But this has to fit into every department's work plan and set to priorities. So it's why I glanced at your CAO.
She's getting all ready to say something.
We work really well here together, but we will have to accept that everything has an order to do, right? And we will work through it. I don't think that, and I had a similar question from the Regional Districts Board, endorsing these doesn't automatically put these to the top of anybody's to-do list.
Thank you.
CAO, you would comment?
Yeah, through the chair, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Tom for coming here and presenting to us. One strength that we do have in our collaboration with Lahaman and the QRD's communications team is this gives us some of the template language that we've agreed on so that when we roll out the actual details that we would get from the health authority, the three communications people who work closely with Ryan and myself would agree on some messaging, and one government like Lahaman might change some of the wording for them, but there's opportunity for us to just have consistent messaging. And I think we've got examples of where we've done that even presently around different communication around heat or cold. So I would see that being almost continuing to be part of the way we work together. And with the communications, that's a key part of getting this out to the community. I think Mr. Tom spoke to a very important piece, and that's our collective relationship as local governments with the health authority and following their lead and guidance and their messaging. And so I think one of the things that he's alluded to quite succinctly is how we play off each other in terms of the health response to this and then our own pieces. For us as a jurisdiction, what this also gives us is the ability with like planning in terms of infrastructure, urban trees, and those decision-making pieces that as we review different parts of our policies and procedures relating to development and things we look, that we have a lens to refer back to when it comes to things like urban cooling strategies. So that's what it does, is it gives us our responsibilities in those pieces, but then in the wider engagement with the community, I think it gives us a good framework. And the one thing we do have is good collaboration. So with that, I hope I've given a bit of an answer, and hopefully that makes sense to Mr. Tom. Thank you.
Okay, we have two other questions, Councillor Southcott and then Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I really appreciate the programs that you conducted over a period of time that you called evacuation planning, which really turned out to be a whole lot broader and got people involved in conversation with each other. So I felt those exercises were extremely valuable. And I'm wondering, this is almost more of an esoteric sort of thing, even though we know that over 600 people reportedly perished in BC due to that heat dome in 2021. And the things like this have gone back to even documented decades. Chicago had one in 95. And I had read about that, but I still didn't appreciate it in 2021. And I was busy building a fence out in my backyard and had a bit of heat exhaustion, much to my amazing surprise with my background. But anyway, that demonstrated to me, I don't think I'm the only one who, this is a bit on the esoteric side. So getting back to the question, have you given any thought to how this might be rolled out to community to encourage people to really think about it and talk about it? Or do you think there's potential in terms of what you did with the evacuation plans or anything else? Got any ideas that how to target that?
Great question again, through the chair. Again, this being year one, I think we'll be a little bit reactive instead of proactive in terms of any kind of public rollout to give us time just to make sure we had the direction from councils and board, of course, prior to planning that. But that being said, that's a big part, and throughout all of the months of work and discussions here, even in just trying to throw the net wide to the agencies and public groups, et cetera, and community hall and everything else that, when you look around our community and what matters and who, because everybody has a role to play in this. The goal was always that we're doing this with provincial funding for our local governments and the First Nations government. And that's what it speaks to. But really, the common theme that kept coming up was this opportunity to lead by example, right? But stay within our jurisdictional bounds. And so There will be this, certainly like the evacuation planning and a lot of our other regional emergency preparedness, our Fire Smart public education series, the other types of work that we do. We'll start to include this and incorporate this. But that's certainly the hope. Even just this week, I had a call from one of the ratepayers groups here in the city interested if I'd come and speak specifically about this. And so the opportunity will come, and just the people who pay attention to council meetings or read agendas, hopefully will reach out, and we'll just be a little bit reactive here before we're able to then incorporate it into our sort of suite of emergency planning opportunities to try to broaden this, because that's how we're going to be successful in this, is not just the city of Powell River doing its part, but when all of the public understands, and as Councillor Doubt said, I think is really where we're going to win, when we're looking across the street and to our neighbors and thinking about our family. Heat domes won't sneak up on us. The weather forecasting is reasonably reliable. And what we want to be able to do is communicate ahead of time, and that everybody's got a plan as local governments, but also as individuals, community halls, community groups, whatever you might represent, right? So, yes.
Awesome. Thank you. So Blockwatch could be, sorry if I may, might even be able to help out if they got Blockwatch going.
Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Toms, or through the chair to Mr. Toms, I'm wondering about recommendation number 16, which are kind of some of the regulatory tools that the city can potentially implement. And one of the items that I don't see in the list as possible examples, like it mentions BC building code provisions, shade trees, and exterior window awnings. I know some municipalities have implemented bylaws related to minimum standards for rental units. So for example, if a house is being rented, that at least one of the rooms could have a temperature maximum of 26 degrees, so that there's one safe room in a rental to be in. And I'm wondering whether that was considered within the recommendations, because there isn't reference to, and explicitly as there has been for some of the other items, nothing explicit about minimum standards or bylaws. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair again, thanks for that question. And that was again a reasonably big part of a discussion during and through this. And I won't try to speak, outside of my department, although I do see your director of planning online with us, and this is where we really relied on the planning department to make sure that these recommendations fit. So I don't know, Councillor Isaacson, that I'd want to try to speak specifically to potential city bylaws in that regard. We do know that there's things that have already come, in reference to the building code, and at least with where the building code's going to apply in new builds or significant renovations and mandatory maximum temperatures in at least one room in a dwelling. There are some of those advances already in play, but I believe that your city planning department was comfortable with these recommendations to consider along the lines of what you're looking at. But I don't know that I'm really the right person to answer that specific question as to where your planning department's going to want to go or your bylaws department's going to want to go.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. I'm specifically thinking about existing rental stock because that's the majority of what we've got in terms of housing. And so I'm wondering through the chair if Mr. Gao has any planning related responses to my question.
Through the chair to Councillor Isaacson, I think I would want to spend a bit of time looking at how other communities implemented that. Off the top of my head, it's not as simple as using your building bylaw to implement those requirements, and I suggest it's probably something to do with zoning. Admittedly, it was my colleague Daniela that played a bigger role in this, so I'd want to spend a bit more time thinking about my answer in regards. I will say more broadly, if there was an interest on council's part to see this type of solution included with the recommendations here, it wouldn't be a really hard chore to kind of shift gears a little bit and include something like that. I don't think it Granted, it's not clearly outlined here, but it doesn't preclude it. But I do think staff would want a bit of time to research and come back and explain how other municipalities have gone about establishing such requirements.
Thank you. I don't, because this report is focused on recommendations and should, I think at this point, I wouldn't be interested in a report for staff, but I would love to have city bylaws included or added to as a reference to item 16, so that in the future, were you taking on work that might include this, that that it's clear that council is open to considering that.
You have a recommendation. Council would like to proceed.
I would move the motion in the package.
It sounds like what Councillor Isaacson is doing is making a motion to amend the report. And I wonder about the correct way to do that, because Mr. Toms has already told us that this report has already been endorsed, I believe, by the Cathett Regional District and the Tla'amin Nation. I don't know if we have the power to change it at this point. I understand what Councillor Isaacson is saying, but we have the ability as a council, if we want to direct planning staff to change bylaws, to do that. We can accept this report as it is, and in a separate operation, instruct planning department what we want to do about bylaws. So I'm questioning whether it's correct to amend this at this point.
So, Councillor Elliott, were you proposing to move a motion with regard to the recommendation on the agenda, or something other?
I was proposing to move the recommendation on the agenda, and I consider, in response to the other question, I consider the wording in recommendation number 16 that specifically says the City of Powell River should consider applying regulatory tools to affect heat mitigation measures to be broad enough to include what Councillor Isaacson's saying without specifying it. And I do believe Councillor Dowd is correct that should we at some point want to provide specific direction related to that recommendation, we could do so without having to amend the actual plan.
To proceed then?
I move that council receive and endorse the recommendations as they apply in relation to the City of Powell River contained within the Cathett Regional Extreme Heat Response Plan dated December 10th, 2024.
Seconded by Councillor Almeida. Any further discussion before we call?
Yes, Your Worship, I just wanted to speak a little bit to the motion. We're accepting this plan, and as Mr. Toms has pointed out, it's a work in progress as far as implementing the plan. It's still new to everybody, and we're hoping to look at the recommendations and see how we might be able to address them through our work plans in the future. I think that one of the things we might as a council consider is asking staff specifically what we're doing about the implementation of this plan, so that we might provide more specific direction and options in the future. But I don't think we need to do that today.
Councillor Isaacs.
Thank you, Mayor Wasno. In response to Councillor Doubt's question about whether it's the appropriate time to amend, I know the regional district in their discussions about this report, I believe, recommended that they endorse the recommendations except item 20. I don't know if that's gone to the board yet, or if that's just at the committee level. Mr. Tom Maber or one of our members be able to speak to that. So I think so what I would like to do is to propose, has the motion been seconded?
Yes.
Okay, I would like to propose an amendment
Just before, would you like to hear from Councillor Elliott on the question you raised?
Sure, thank you, and then I would continue.
Thank you, Your Worship. So they did not amend the plan, but they did make a recommendation that they did not support I think it was 2 recommendations within the report. And so they recommended, they adopted and accepted everything except for 2 of the recommendations, and they excluded those recommendations from their endorsement. And you can specifically, the reasons why it had to do with the available tools they had within the regional district and not wanting to have building inspectors and things like that. And it had mostly to do with that.
Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Mayor. Then perhaps the proposed amendment I'd like to move is kind of an addition at the very end, so comma, adding the words and adding to recommendation 16 the possibility of a maximum temperature bylaw.
Not seeing anybody seconding the amended motion.
Okay.
We'll return now to any further discussion on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Passed unanimously. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
We're now going to move to the mid-level connector. CAO?
Okay, through the chair, before I hand over to Director Gao, you have a report for decision relating to a grant application for the mid-level connector, the Brooks School Connection Project section, and it's a Federal Active Transportation Fund grant. Mr. Gao can answer any questions or explain more details about how the funding is intended to work should you endorse this. Thank you.
Councillor Doubt.
Yeah, so, my impression up to this point has been that the city has a plan to pay for the mid-level connector from a combination of grants, et cetera. This is an application to apply for another grant, hopefully to cover it. What happens if the grant is not accepted? Does this transfer some expense to the city that's not otherwise covered, or what happens?
Through the chair, if I could ask a combination of Ms. Denniston and Director Gao to respond to Councillor Doubt's question about clarifying how we would fund under our current process if we were not able to get the grant. Thank you.
Through the chair, to Councillor Doubt, if we were unable to secure this grant, we would be coming back to council with a budget amendment to propose an alternate source of funding.
Okay, so I take that to mean that there currently is no alternative source of funding, but hopefully we're counting on getting the grant.
Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Mayor. A question, I guess, back to CFO regarding the last answer. I guess an alternate source of funding would also then be the option to not do that leg of the project at that time being?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Yes, Councillor Elliott.
I see clarity around the in the report. It talks about if we don't apply for the grant, that there is no avenue for reducing the amount that the proposed budget being $725 now instead of whatever it was. And so my understanding is it's in the current budget at 900 and something with funding attached to it. So we would be asking for less from Community Works and less from the other avenues, and the overall budget is less. Was it part of our capital assets budget that we had it in there already before? Like where did we identify funding for it before we came forward with this report?
Through the chair, this is in the 2024 and the 2025 proposed budget, this project. As you noted, in the 2025 proposed budget, in draft one, it was originally proposed at a higher amount. And since then, we've brought the estimate down since receiving further information on the design.
Please, Southcott.
Thank you, Worship.
Getting an answer.
I understood that the Director of Planning may have something to speak to us about with regard to this report. That's what I was expecting. I wonder if that was a false expectation. And I'd really be interested in hearing from him if that was the case.
Through the chair to Councillor Southcott, I do have a presentation and prepared to give that if that would make people happy.
It would.
I'd love
Then
to hear
please.
it.
Let me share my screen. I assume everybody can see that. Maybe just a second as it pops up. So the purpose of this report is to secure council approval for a grant application to the Federal Active Transportation Fund for the Mid-Level Connector and what we are referring to as the Brooks School Connection Project. City staff continue to seek funding for the implementation of key active transportation routes that align with the framework established in the city's official community plan. The Sustainable Efficient Community Plan lays out a north-south active transportation link that connects Townsite to Westview along Sycamore Street, Maple Avenue, and the Mid-Level Connector Multi-Use Pathway Project. The Maple and Sycamore Safe Streets project was completed in December 2024 and provides a safe active transportation link from the north end of Townsite to Brooks Secondary School. The Mid-Level Connector Multi-Use Pathway will connect the recreation complex to Brooks via safe, all ages and abilities multi-use pathway. And this project is currently under construction, scheduled for completion in May of this year. The Brooks School Connection Project will link these two active transportation facilities via the school property to create a continuous, safe, all ages and abilities north-south route. And on the screen, you can see at least most of what is referred to as that north-south connection, with the lighter green being the mid-level connector, the orange being the connection through Brooks School, and then the darker green being the Maple Avenue Sycamore Safe Streets project. To date, the city has leveraged over 1.4 million in provincial grants to support the implementation of this north-south active transportation corridor. On December 12th, the federal government announced a second intake of the Active Transportation Fund program. The Brooks School Connection is an essential connection required to complete the north-south active transportation link, and the federal announcement represents an opportunity to obtain substantial funding towards its development. February 26th, 6 days from today, is the application deadline for this intake of the Federal Active Transportation Fund. To support a funding application for a safe, separated multi-use pathway going through the Brooks property, city staff have been working collaboratively with this school district staff on developing a conceptual design and cost estimate for the project. The conceptual design has been presented to the school board, and they have provided the city with a letter of support that is included as an attachment on the staff report. And on the screen, you can see a key segment of this proposed project. This is, if you're familiar with the site, there's a parking lot to the very east side of that property, adjacent to the turf field. And what's being proposed is a 3-meter wide paved surface along that stretch of the parking area, movement of the parking stalls themselves, and some realignment of lighting and such, raised crosswalks. The goal really is to improve pedestrian and cycling accessibility through the site, but also to those using the site. So again, if anybody's familiar with this part of our community, it's not only an active school site, but through many hours of the evening, the turf is being used by many people in the community. So this would ensure that there's a separation between vehicle, cyclists, and pedestrian activity through the site. So given that this section of path would require maintenance and capital upgrades throughout its life, the city will need to work with the school district to ensure an agreement is in place. And the agreement will need to clarify roles and responsibilities for future maintenance and upgrade costs, address long-term access to the path for public use through what is currently school district property, and ensure that measures are in place to clarify who holds risk and liability for use of the path. Now, this work can take place concurrently with the grant application process. And we've touched on financial implications, but I'm going to just kind of go through what I prepared, and hopefully this maybe addresses some of the questions that were already raised. So as for financial implications, federal and active transportation grants are a 60-40 split, with the city responsible to secure 40% of the project funding. This project is currently included in draft 1 of the City of Powell River 2025-2029 Financial Plan Bylaw 2751, with the city's portion to be, or proposed to be, funded from the city's Community Works Fund. However, this financial plan will not be adopted until after the February 26th grant application deadline, and as a result, the 2025 year of the current City of Powell River 5-year Financial Plan Bylaw 2742 must be amended in order for the grant application to be made for this project. And as it was already touched on, that in draft 1, the project is estimated to cost $975,000, but following the development of the conceptual design and preparation of a Class D cost estimate by the city's consultant, the original cost estimate has been refined to be $725,000, or a decrease of $250,000. Should council direct staff to pursue the project, draft 2 would be updated to reflect the lower cost estimate. Specifically, the Community Works Fund would be $100,000 less, and the active transportation grant would be $150,000 less than in draft 1. So these changes are reflected in the recommendation in the staff report, and that is my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Gao. Councillor Doat.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand what we're doing here, because I think at the Rising report from a closed meeting about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, we rose and report that we were awarding the contract for the mid-level connector as a result of that RFP. And when I asked the question earlier, if we don't get the grant, what happens? And Councillor Alameda said, does that still leave us the opportunity not to do the mid-level connector? Are all of those answers correct? Can we get out of the, has that RFP actually been awarded? The project actually been awarded, or is it on hold until we see what happens to the grant money?
Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take a stab at it, and Director Gao can fill in the gaps if I make a mistake, because I also had the same misinterpretation when I read the report preparing for this meeting, Councillor Doat. And I was also wondering that because I thought all the grants had been approved for the mid-level connector, and I would look at this as, I guess, a 3-phase project, and the application that Director Gao is applying for now is the 3rd phase, which is connecting Maple Sycamore, which is already done, to the mid-level connector, which is about to be built. And this is phase 3, which is the one actually going through Brooks School. So it's a different segment that we haven't started on yet. And this is the first time we're discussing it. So it's just got the name is maybe having a similar name to it. This is what threw me off at first, but Director Gao can correct me if I made a mistake on that one.
Director Gao.
Through the chair to Councillor Almeida, that's correct. It's a 3-phase project. The award for the mid-level connector itself has been awarded to MIB, and work has begun on that. This is for the 3rd phase. It is the connection between the Maple Avenue Sycamore Safe Streets project and the mid-level connector that goes to the south side of the Brooks property.
Okay, we have recommendations from staff. Councilor Almeida?
I move that council direct staff to apply for a federal active transportation fund grant to fund the construction of a $725,000 multi-use pathway through the Brooks Secondary School property that will connect the Maple and Sycamore Safe Streets corridor to the mid-level connector multi-use pathway. And that council directs staff to prepare a budget amendment to the 2025 year of the City of Powell River 5-year financial plan bylaw 2742-2024 to add the mid-level connector Brooks School Connection capital project with the following funding sources: $290,000, 40% from the Community Works Fund, and $435,000, 60% from the Federal Active Transportation Fund grant, for a total project budget of $725,000. And that the upcoming draft of the City of Powell River 2025 to 2029 financial plan bylaw number 2751 be updated to decrease the total cost of the mid-level connector Brooks School Connection from $975,000 to $725,000, and to be funded by $290,000 of Community Works funding and $435,000 from the Federal Active Transportation Fund grant. And further, that council directs staff to enter into negotiations with the Cowthut School District regarding an agreement to address long-term public access to the path, as well as roles and responsibilities for maintenance and capital upgrades.
Seconded by Councillor Southcott. Any further discussion? Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Mayor Worsno. Question through the chair to staff. I know there's a number of priorities in the active transportation master plan. I forget the name of it. And so I'm wondering, when you decide to apply for grant, when grant opportunities come up like this, were there other priorities that planning staff had considered before focusing in on this one, or how is it determined which aspect of active transportation to choose from?
Through the chair, Councillor Isaacson. In this case, it was our communication between the school district and city staff and our awareness that it was important to the school district that something be completed that would address safety issues through this portion of the site. There are other active transportation priorities, you're correct, but some of them are quite a bit larger, than a small segment. So in some ways, part of that was also dollar value, looking at what was feasible in terms of an application at this point.
Thank you.
Any further questions before we call the motion? Councillor Cindy.
Councillor Cindy. Thank you, Your Worship. So my understanding is phase 1 was the Maple Sycamore, and phase 2 of the mid connector was from the edge of the school district property through the forest and over to the rec center. And this is phase 3, which connects the Maple Sycamore part through the school district property to the beginning of the forested area. So I understand that now. I'm in favor of connecting them. And through as a question as part of this, I'd like to ask staff if the folks at the school district are in favor of the trail, or if they're worried about the increase in traffic there, and that's have they brought up concerns about maybe stopping people from going through there if we don't make improvements?
Through the chair to Councillor Isaacson, to Councillor Elliott. The school board supported this project many years ago. I think due to the length of time that it took us to get both the Maple Avenue as well as the mid-level kind of underway, we needed to circle back and have those conversations. And through that process, we identified that there was some concern about users on this particular stretch. There wasn't ever a conversation about stopping people from using this. I think this is two partners working together collaboratively to try and find a solution that works for, as I said earlier, not just school, students and those attending the school, but actually the residents of the community, whether they're traveling through it or using the turf field, which is, as I said earlier, a very active part of our community.
Thank you.
Councillor Isaacson, do you have another question?
I do. Thank you, Chair. Through the chair to staff this time, I think CFO Denniston, I'm wondering when the funding sources were proposed, specifically the Community Works Fund portion, are there other reserve funds that we have that would be eligible to fund such a project? I'm just considering Community Works funding being something that often we can use for a variety of purposes. And I'm wondering if there are other reserve funds that are maybe more restrictive that, given perhaps other shifting, could be used for this this project?
Through the chair, there could be other options. Community forest may be an okay fit if council were looking to shift from Community Works Fund. And the Growing Community Fund is currently fully allocated, so that wouldn't be an option. The Infrastructure Reserve would also be eligible, but that does not have sufficient funds. So it would really come down to Community Works or Powell River Community Forest.
Okay, thank you.
We have a motion on the floor. Seeing no other questions, I'm going to call the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Passed unanimously. Thank you very much, Director Gao. We'll now move to the reports for information. Reports from the municipal directors of the Cathett Regional District. Who would like to respond?
I think it might be my turn, is it?
I think so.
Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Your Worship. This was a fairly short, the last board meeting, which was on the 11th, was reasonably short. There were quite a few agenda items that were in there. They were in their consent agenda, but those are still pretty relevant to business of the region. It's just that they were generally discussed enough in committee of the whole meetings that they essentially turn up on the agenda simply to be passed or to be pulled out of the agenda, of which I think only one was. So I'll just go through them really quickly. There is a couple of items that focused on asking for regional district comment on proposed mining development work on Texada. The decisions to permit that is in the hands of the Ministry of Mines and Critical Minerals of the province, not the regional district, but consideration is given to comment from the regional district. So they get to know what's going on and comment if necessary. And they did take that opportunity, citing concerns for adequate environmental protections concerning that work. Quite responsible, looking after community and the beautiful natural environment of Texada. Subdivision over by Gillies Bay on a piece of managed forest, private managed forest land, taking a little piece out for this nonprofit group on Texada that has been working quite a while to develop senior housing, and this piece of land is aimed at 40-unit seniors housing development. So this is just basically to approve the subdivision, or this now it's in agricultural land reserve, and the regional district approval then goes to the ALC to approve that. Stacey Fletcher's mural project also went through the RD agenda, and staff's been directed to see what they can do as far as assisting her in that project, like we have discussed previously here around the table. I think that came up on this Tuesday. a letter to the Immigration Refugee IRCC. Immigration Refugee, what's that second C stand for? Canada.
Yeah.
Anyway, the department that basically has decided to cut back rural support for refugees, immigrant services here by 85%. The RD staff is going to send a letter to Refugee and Citizenship Canada. That's it. Trying to, or will attempt to argue that it is really disadvantageous to many of the people who are served by that fine organization here under LIFT, one of LIFT's multiple operations. That's been doing great work for many years. Though this targets office staff and direct services, it's also going to make it very difficult to manage volunteer support of immigrants in this town, which is really worth arguing for. Savory Island roads, once again, they're writing to the Ministry of Transportation and Transit, trying to argue for better care of Savory Island roads. That's been going on for decades. The extreme heat plan went through the board in that meeting, just like we just heard from Manager Toms. Accessibility of people to the new Resource Recovery Center for recycling, particularly to people who are not able to get up there in their own vehicles, was considered, and that's being funneled off to other advisory committees. The request letter from the mayor representing us to the RD for financing for the sub-regional recreation service, specifically for the rec complex, has been declined respectfully, pending the outcome of their service review for that service down there. And those old meetings that we used to have with the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure representatives here, there's a letter that's gone to MOTT to request that these be resumed. I think everybody's missed them since they were discontinued. The only bylaw considered was upping the requisition rate for the Savory Island Fire Department because they need more. Trucks or another truck and to be replaced, I believe, and also their fire hall. So they need to up their requisition. That's basically, in my recollection and my notes, what occurred in that meeting.
Clearly.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Southcott. That was great. In addition to declining the letter from the city, they also decided to commit $238,244,000 this year while the process of the service review is happening, and the expectation being that a new agreement would get negotiated that would address why additional increases would need to happen or not. The thinking behind that is that the formula in the agreement that has expired could be used in lieu of the fact that we don't have a current agreement and that there's a service review underway. And so that was the agreed to amount. There was a Rise report from the closed meeting also, and they did three Rise reports. One was board rescinded Cathet Regional District Policy number 4.6 performance appraisal process guidelines, and that was mainly because they were quite old and none of it was being followed, and a new process was currently being used and was an operational policy that didn't require a board level policy. the second Rise and Report was the board directed staff to advertise and enter into a rental or lease agreement for Unit 103 and 105 of 4675 Marine Avenue at their existing market rental value. And third Rise and Report was the board appointed Melissa Mosley to the Savory Island Community Plan Advisory Committee. And that's my only additions. Thanks.
Very much. We'll now move to new business. And just for clarity, could the corporate officer remind me the motion put forward by Councillor Elliott that becomes 15.2, is that correct?
I think it would be 17. Notices of motion.
Yes, procedure bylaw. Thank you very much. Eventually, my eyes are going to allow me to focus with 3 pairs of glasses. Bylaw, proposed bylaw. Yes, Councillor Almeida.
For the community's benefit, we've already gone through three readings of our procedural bylaw, so I will read the motion and take it from there. So I move that City of Powell River Council Procedure Bylaw 2756, 2024 be adopted.
Second, Councillor Southcott. Any discussion before we call the motion? All in, Councillor Doubt.
I'm not going to take a long time to do it, but I just want to point out that council has worked long and hard to create this new procedure bylaw, which replaces one from, I think, 2015, 2016. It has quite a huge number of changes, actually, from the previous one. Too many to talk about in a short speech. But it does, I think, one of the most important things it does is it creates more diverse opportunities for the public to have input on decisions that council is making. Some of them before council actually makes a decision, which I think is a step in the right direction. And if we can all stick to what the different input opportunities are, I think it'll improve our council meetings. But I'm in favor of this. And as I say, everybody on council worked long and hard to get this to this stage, and I hope it passes.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott.
I'm in support of this. I had noted a concern that somebody seemed to believe our definition about a quorum applied to in a different way. And so I just wonder if staff could address the section that talks about the quorum and how it applies. And the concern seemed to be that that definition allowed committees to have a quorum of council and make decisions. And while I know that that is not what is intended by the definition, I would like for staff to explain how that definition applies to the various levels of things. And I guess it was under a title that included council and committee of the whole, and the definition was a little broader, including committees. And so I don't actually see the section exactly in here, but it was a definition about quorum.
So your worship, quorum, reading the section to me is clear. It's it's the half your group plus one. And so the way the section is worded, it's that depending on the size of the committee in question. So for council and committee of the whole, it's 7, so quorum's 4. If a committee, that's why you have an odd number of people on a committee, so you can reach quorum. And so the quorum for any particular committee would depend upon the number of members on it, and it's half plus 1.
Yes.
And so no time a quorum of a committee is given jurisdiction to make decisions on behalf of council.
Your worship, so a committee of council That's not, council can't make decisions for council.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. And no further discussion. I'm going to call the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Passed unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll now move to new business. We have Councillor Doudt.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to make this motion tonight. If you may recall that at our February 6th meeting, I tried to get this item on the agenda and hope to get it done quickly because it has a report that the commissioner has to make by May 15th. I wasn't aware of when the deadline would be for submissions to this body, but further research and things I've learned since then revealed that the deadline for submission was May 14th. We're too late for those submissions now, so the motion is really moot. We don't have an opportunity to participate because the deadline is passed. So I did make a personal submission. Anybody could if they wanted to, but there's really no point in going further with this motion tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Doudt.
Councillor Doudt said the deadline's May 14th. Did you mean February?
Yeah, I'm sorry. May 15th is the final report of the commission, and the opportunity to make submissions expired on February 14th.
Okay, thank you.
I'll move to item 17. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. Earlier today, we added a notice of motion to our agenda, and I'll just read out our notice of motion, or the one I put forward. I got to get back to that page. The notice of motion is that council form a working group with Mayor Wasnow and Councillor Elliott to liaise with the Community Forest Board and form recommendations to council regarding the community forest. And that's not for discussion tonight. It's just a notice of motion. My question, though, is if we have a special council meeting between now and the next one, could this go on that agenda?
Ask our corporate officer.
Your worship, your meeting next week is really dedicated to the budget. It really depends on, do you want to focus other business of that as well? The new procedure bylaw will come into effect now that's been adopted. So I'd have to double check what the what the exact wording is on special council meetings for what you can put on the agenda. If not, it would appear on the meeting, the council meeting in March.
Is there a consensus that we can let the CO decide if it will be on the special council meeting or to the next regular council meeting?
Yes, Your Worship. And if there is just the matter of consulting with the mayor, I would presume he would do so.
Thank you.
I think we still have to call the question. Oh, no, we're not. Never mind. It was a notice motion. I'm confused. Carry on.
Mr. Galinsky, do you have any questions for us?
Thanks, Your Worship. I appreciate the opportunity. My question is with regard to the mid-level connector Brook School connection. And I believe Councillor Elliott touched on the safety concerns perhaps at Brook School. And I'm wondering through the chair what the Director of Planning would have to say about how things will manifest themselves with that particular extension.
To Mr. Galinsky, the question is, with the new infrastructure, whether there's anticipated to be concern around the added users?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. So the intent of the new infrastructure is to create a separated pathway. So you do have a 3-meter wide paved surface for cyclists and pedestrians to utilize, so to remove those users from the vehicle travel areas with one raised crosswalk that would actually connect across the drive aisle in towards the turf. So it's intended to really create that separation between users, the goal being to make it as safe as possible. This corridor, this north-south corridor is in all ages and abilities designed facility. And so this portion is intended to be just the same, just as suitable for all riders of all abilities.
I thank the director for his response. Through the chair again, is parking going to be affected by the construction of this particular connector?
To Mr. Galinsky, there is, I think, a modest reduction. And when I say modest, I think it's 1 or 2 spaces. And in part because the turnaround that currently exists there is inadequate. And so I think the school district was interested in, and keep in mind, the school district has been a party to these discussions and has played a key role in the development of this conceptual design. And so the reduction isn't something that's new to them. And in fact, I think endorsed by them because they are excited about making sure there's an adequate turnaround at the end of this parking lot.
Thank you for that. Through the chair again, there was a reduction in the amount of expenditure that was anticipated from $975,000 to $725,000, and I seem to understand that that was as a consequence of some design work that has been done. Has a consultant been hired to look at this project?
To Mr. Galinsky, yes, so ISL Engineering has been working with the city, and they have, as I said earlier, they've produced the conceptual design as well as that Class D cost estimate. I would add that part of that reduction in cost is likely tied to some initial concerns about slope stability, but Geotech was hired to actually look at the slope stability on the east-west side of the turf, and came back with a positive report saying that there was no slope instability there, and so that likely was a big part of the reduction of that initial cost estimate.
I thank the director very much. Thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity to ask questions.
Thank you. All right. We'll just see if there's anybody else in the audience. All right, we'll move to the caller. Welcome.
Oh, good evening. It's Sherry Burton. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Councillor. I'm calling in regards to agenda item 12.2. I'm looking for some clarification for the cost to taxpayers. At the January 23, 2025 meeting, there was a rise and report with regards to the contract given to MIB Excavating, including GST. That amount is just over 1.2 million. I'm hoping that Director Gao or the CFO can advise if that contract is covered by any grants, or is that going to be funded by taxpayers?
I'm happy to speak to that, and it is actually in the report. So to Ms. Burton, in the staff report. Yeah, so in the staff report, today's report, under the background, there's a breakdown of the mid-level connector and then the Maple Avenue Sycamore Street. So the mid-level connector, and just for clarity, the mid-level connector refers to the portion that you're talking about awarded to MIB. And so you can see in that report, the references 594,887,000, $594,887,000. That is coming from the Powell River Community Forest, 549,975 from Clean BC Communities. That's a provincial grant, and then 450 from the Active Transportation Fund, which is a provincial grant as well, and then the Vancouver Coastal Health for $21,640, and then ICBC for $10,000. So from a taxpayer perspective, and maybe Mallory wants to, sorry, Ms. Dennison wants to speak to the impact to the taxpayer, but from my perspective, we're dealing with grant funding at this point.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I did read the report, but I didn't realize that it was also including the MIB contract as well, so I appreciate the clarification. It's just in the budget table in that report, because I guess because I didn't see the MIB expense in there, that's why I was seeking clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else online? All right, could we have a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Second by Councillor Southcott. Any discussion on this item? All in favor?
Aye.
Passed unanimously. Thank you very much.